Paid to Play podcast. Episode 66. By PC Pod or Pad, you're listening to and quite possibly watching Paid to Play. I'm Rob Farker, your host for this weekly exploration of the dangerous idea that bringing your whole self, especially the bits of you that you worry make you seem silly, geeky, or even odd, into your income-generating life is one of the best things you can do. It might not be easy, but it's easier than we think and even fear, and I'd like to show you how. Now, this week is one of my even-numbered episodes, episode 66. Usually in these episodes, I have three segments: Money Where My Mouth Is, Musings, and Mailbag. But I want to do something a little bit different this week. I want to pretty much talk about musings. There's not been all that much Money Where My Mouth Is action over the past couple of weeks, and as usual, I've not had any mailbag feedback for this episode. Which is one of the things that I'll touch on during this musing. See, pardon the scratching of the nose here. A couple of weeks ago, a couple of things happened. I've been feeling a little bit dissatisfied with the podcast for a little while now. Those of you who are long-time listeners will know that around about mid last year, toward the beginning to the first 3 months of this year, I had a bit of a break from the podcast. I had some episodes in the can. Well, I had one episode in the can that it took me about 8 or 9 months to actually get up. In the meantime, my guest, who had been living in Cairns, had actually moved down to Sydney. And yeah, I had sort of had a period where I had lost enthusiasm for doing the show. And I hate to say it, but I'm kind of in the same space now. I wrote a couple of blog posts in the last week or so that kind of touch on this. And I'll just go over them and get a couple of extracts, or else if I read the whole thing, or both of them, I'd probably be here forever. And unfortunately, I don't have much time to record this podcast because this one was running a little bit late this week as well. It suddenly feels as though with the Paid to Play podcast, I've made myself a day job in my spare time. It's something that I was really pushing myself to do, that I didn't really have the enthusiasm to do, and when I was sitting down to do it, I felt myself wanting to go do anything else, something that actually felt productive: weed the veggie bed, clean the house. I mean, how's that for a scary thought? I'd rather be doing chores than editing an episode of this podcast together or looking for more guests. And funnily enough, this isn't the only thing recently that I've felt the same way about. As you know, I've been doing some voice work recently, working on a couple of projects for a few people. And I've been trying to do some homework, research some accents and all that sort of thing for it. And at one point, my wife Vicky, who normally sort of sits next to me here in the front office, our computers are situated next to each other. She sort of noticed what I was doing and asked me a couple of questions about it, and then said something that was kind of telling, that most of the time when I'm pursuing these things that are supposedly going to make my life better and happier, she sees me unhappy. And on one hand, you would be tempted to say, well, of course, it's not going to be easy straight out of the gate. It's a destination that you have to get to. But on the other hand, this podcast is called Paid to Play, and if the moment-to-moment work isn't playful, if the journey toward the destination I'm not enjoying, if I'm not feeling good within the challenge, if I'm just feeling frustrated and pushing things uphill, or if I don't really believe in the work that I'm doing. It's a tricky word, isn't it? Believe. It's something that I tend to struggle with. And maybe it is the wrong word, because belief is more, I guess, about what you do or what you fix on in the absence of sufficient and compelling evidence. Doing the Paid to Play podcast to a certain extent, and with my apologies to the Diamonds, I sort of suddenly realised that the scripts they'd been giving me, I just wasn't particularly interested in. They were, they were fantasy scripts and they were interesting stuff, but I guess I'm looking for... one of my guests, Kristen Baker, who I had on for a few episodes of the podcast, track her episode down, look it up on Paid to Play and do a search for Kristen Baker, or just Baker, as there are a few ways you can spell Kristen nowadays. She says it, I think she says it right, it's about doing the things that light you up. And I think for a long time, one of my main problems has been trying to please other people and doing things to make sure that people don't get upset with me, and perhaps, just to try and keep my head down, or do the things that it sort of seems like I ought to be doing or should be doing. And when I get a little bit involved with something and make those initial efforts, or those initial contact, and start getting the things that they want me to do, instead of actually like taking a couple of deep breaths, going over it, and being aware of how I feel about these things, and realizing whether or not I'm actually, the work is that I'm getting in front of me is putting a smile on my face, or is making me feel enthusiastic about doing it, then the best thing for me to do is politely say, look, thank you very much, but I don't think that I'm the best person for this, or that thank you, or quite simply, knocking the microphone here, thank you, but no. And it doesn't really require any more explanation than that. Simply say, no, I do not want to do this for you. Try and use diplomatic language, but be firm on the fact that it is not going to happen. And I guess sometimes that's one thing we all need to work on. Try and find ways of saying no that aren't rude, but also don't give room for the other person to try and negotiate you into a yes, or to try and convince you into a yes, because if you give a reason, then that gives the other person to argue around that reason, to try and establish that reason is invalid, when in the end, basically, the simple reason is you know what you're looking for, and this is not it. And you are not interested in investing your time, which ultimately is the most precious resource we all have. All we have is now, and if we're not enjoying now, if we're not intriguingly challenged by now, then we need to spend our nows looking for other things that do challenge us, that we do enjoy doing, journeys that feel good to be on, rather than unpleasant, or even just if you could, if it doesn't upset you, but still, on the other hand, if it doesn't inspire you or intrigue you, then that can be just as bad as something that does upset you, because either way, it's, why would you want to spend time feeling like that? So yes, that's kind of the situation where I am at the moment. And I do actually know what I'm looking for. I mentioned in the blog post I wrote about getting back into the podcast that there were a couple of instances recently when I was doing work that did intrigue me, that I couldn't stop until I had it done. And that was when I re-recorded the short stories Ogre and GEV for my personal website over on robf.com.au. Another thing I mentioned in that post was that another indicator that right now the Pay to Play podcast isn't really for me is that I don't listen to it. I have done work that I've wanted to go back and reread, even if it is just to edit, because, you know, I liked the product that I did. And I don't, unless I have to, I don't go back and listen to episodes of the Pay to Play podcast. It's not even a cringe thing where I'm listening to me and going, oh, crap, boy, did I sound shit. It's just, isn't that a sad thing when the subject matter of your own podcast, the thing that you make, doesn't really interest you? I've questioned it in the past. As some of you may know, I did at one point try rethinking the direction of the podcast, and try and make it a bit more geek-related. I was thinking about conventions as a subject matter at one point, and I am kind of glad that I did set that aside, because in the end I don't think it would have been something that would have kept me going or would have interested me. So one thing I did ask is, what are the kinds of shows that I do like to listen to? And I thought of three. I mean, before I actually get to those three, I'll say there are other, another thing that sort of made me realise that I didn't maybe want to make the Pay to Play podcast anymore is that I don't even listen to other shows in its genre, or if I do, it's because I've again got this thing in my head that I need to listen to them in order to get tips to improve my craft. And if that's the only reason why I'm listening, to learn better how to do something that I don't enjoy, and in order to learn I'm listening to things that maybe I don't really care about all that much, then that's another sign I need to get out. And I guess folks I would consider peers in the general area of what I'm doing are people like Mer Lafferty, who make I Should Be Writing, which I think was a direct inspiration for Pay to Play, because her podcast about wannabe fiction writers is kind of similar to mine. There is stuff about what she's been doing to try to get her work published, and her reflections on being a fiction writer, and then one-on-one interviews with published authors. And yeah, I listened to it for a while when I thought a published author was what I was meant to be. And, you know, this was the best, this is one of the things I ought to do, to keep up. Also, Joanna Penn's show, The Creative Pen, which is again a similar thing, although it's more generally geared to self-publishing, or just all the various ways that you can get your book out there and read and get people paying for it. Conversations with Richard Feidler, which is a weekday midday radio show that gets aired on ABC local radio, and it's a general chat podcast with all kinds of people from all walks of life. And as good a show it is, I don't listen to it. It's a show that most of the time I can take or leave. And again, isn't that a sad thing? All these things that if I cut them out of my life, it wouldn't really make any kind of difference if they were there or not, then maybe that's a sign that I need to set them aside. So on the other side of the coin, what are the shows that I do enjoy listening to, that I do keep coming back to? I brought it down to three, or perhaps maybe two. The Bungie podcast. Bungie are a video game development studio. They broke megastar status internationally when they made Halo for the Microsoft Xbox game console, and of course they made Halo 2, Halo 3, Halo 3 ODST, and Halo Reach before they bought themselves out from under Microsoft and started working on a game called Destiny alongside Activision, and that's now available on the PlayStation and Xbox game consoles. And it was fun listening to. There are at least 3 people every episode, and they were talking about as much as they could, given that certain things in the development process you simply can't talk about what they'd been up to and working on the games they were working on, and the life in general of being an employee of a game store, and they would rib each other and have fun. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. They haven't made another episode since the beginning of 2014, sadly. And there have been a few major staff changes at Bungie since, but I do still have a few episodes of that tucked away. Another one is the Rooster Teeth podcast. On a Halo note, Rooster Teeth are an independent internet media company who made their name making machinima videos, which are basically animated videos using video games as the animation software and animation studio. And they made their hit web series, which is called Red vs. Blue, using Halo and its various incarnations. They've also done all kinds of things like straight up video projects. They've made an animated series called Ruby. Look it up if you can. It's crazy fun, inspired by anime. I've got to catch up with it sometime. And again, it's this bunch of people getting together and talking about what they've been doing, not just within the studio, but because they're all lucky enough to be pretty damn good mates. The ribbing is even worse, as it were, than it would have been in the Bungie podcast, and they talk about all kinds of things that they've been up to within work, outside of work. And the third one that I've picked up just recently after they followed me on Twitter was the Video Game Outsiders podcast. And again, it's three people talking about the things that they love doing, which happens to be video games. And it's interesting that all three of these things are video game related, although right at the moment, if you've been following me personally on Facebook and or Twitter, you've noticed that I've been kind of going off video games a little. I've not been playing too much. The Xbox 360 has been sitting in my entertainment area mainly as a way of getting YouTube onto my main screen. Although I have been picking up on tabletop role-playing games lately. So if I were to do a podcast, I would want it to be something like that. And right at the moment, I'm not sure Paid to Play in its current format anyway can be like that. And right at the moment, I'm also not sure if I am wanting to really put the hard yards in to start a podcast of my own like that, because there's a fair bit of groundwork that you've got to do: domain name registration, looking for hosting, looking for co-hosts. Fingers crossed, though, I have a couple of friends who are doing a similar kind of video game podcast, who might just have me on as a guest every now and again, or hopefully semi-frequently. We'll see what happens. So no promises there, but right at the moment, I think what I really need to do one way or the other, and funnily enough, given that this is episode 66, which has a certain significance for fans of the Star Wars trilogy, I think it's time I sort of issued that executive order and put the podcast on hold for a few months. I'm not sure if I mentioned earlier on, I do still have 3 interviews in the can. I am going to get those up before the end of the year. And thank you once again to all of my fans on Patreon for helping support the podcast and getting my fees paid for the past few months. It's been fantastic having you on board. As one thing, I suppose, I do want to say on the Patreon front, it's been a great experiment, but one of the things I kind of realized, and that made me realize that maybe I needed to take a break, was that I felt like one of the main reasons I need to keep the podcast going was because I had adjusted my budget, taken hosting fees out of it. So because I knew that if I was going to be doing a couple of episodes a month, that Patreon was going to cover it. And then I sort of felt like I had to keep doing it just to make sure I kept the Patreon fees coming in. And if that was sort of the main reason why I was doing it, yeah, it's time to stop, reevaluate, and work out what the hell I want and where I need to go. So on the general play front, I do want to talk about that, because I think I need to just look at playing, and playing without thinking too hard about it. Just trying things because I'm honestly curious about them and seeing where they go. And if I'm not really playing while I'm doing them, identify that, figure out if it is something that I can fix, if I'm perhaps going about it the wrong way, a way that fosters me getting nervous or worrying about it, changing that thing and seeing what the result is, whether if I approach it from a different angle, if I can be a bit more relaxed about it, and when I am, if it puts a smile back on my face. Look at it that way, instead of actually keeping monetization at the back of my head at all times. If I do this, is this going to lead to something that can earn me a bit of cash? And what I find I'm actually getting back into at the moment is tabletop role-playing games. Excuse me for a moment, I just have a dog who is insisting he wants to get into the office, so I'll be right back. Alright, well, Williams, there you go. Okay, so they're now both in the office with me, as you can probably hear from the puffing and panting. I'm not going to be much longer anyway. So yes, as you can probably see over my right shoulder here, or to the left of your screen, yes, there are a couple of books right there in the background. Deathwatch, the RPG of playing Space Marines from the Warhammer 40,000 universe, and Donjon, which is an independently developed game. How about I actually pick these up and show you? So yeah, this is Deathwatch, and you can find out about that a bit more by going onto the Fantasy Flight Games website, where it's published from. I'll see if I can put a link in the show notes. And here, Donjon, which is an independent role-playing game developed by Clinton R. Nixon, who's done a few things in his time, like The Shadow of Yesterday. And it's basically all about dungeon crawling made simple. So all the stuff, one of the things that Dungeons and Dragons is well known for, going into dungeons, fighting monsters, including dragons, and getting experience and treasure, and sort of boiling the experience down and keeping it rules-wise as simple as possible, and also allowing the players a bit more input into what's going on, and introducing things into the world themselves. I've got a few people who are keen on Deathwatch, and I've actually managed to rope one of my step-grandsons, who is 8 years old, into giving Donjon a go. We brainstormed a bit, by which I mean he did most of the brainstorming, and we've developed sort of a combination of Halo and Far Cry, a couple of video games, as somewhere that he'd like to venture around in and beat bad guys and take over bases, which is perfect. There's your dungeons for you right there. So we'll give it a whirl sometime in the next few weeks and see what happens, and I guess I might blog about it and talk about my experiences, and we'll see how it goes. So anyway, I better wrap this up because I better be going to work in the next few minutes. Next week's episode, this coming Sunday, November the 15th, is going to be my chat with CJ Miozzi, aka Riker. I've mentioned him a couple of times already in these episodes. He is a YouTuber who specialises in Diablo 3, and how to best optimize your characters to play that for maximum effect. And also he's a tabletop role player. He's done a few episodes dedicated to Dungeons and Dragons, so he was great fun to chat with. And like me, he's also got a fantastic voice for voiceover work and YouTubery, so it was fun to talk to him about that as well. So anyway, this is Rob Farquhar wrapping up this episode with my usual message, which I'm kind of taking to heart right at the moment, to stand by your play. You never know just who might appreciate it. I license the interview and monologue content of the Paid to Play podcast under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share-alike 3.0 unported license. That roughly means you can sample, remix and redistribute it as long as you tell people that the bits of it you use came from Rob Farquhar and don't charge anyone for your work. For the full legal text, go to creativecommons.org. The theme music is written, performed by, copyright and used with the kind permission of Miracle of Sound. All rights reserved. For more great music inspired by geek culture, check out miracleofsound, or one word, .net. This podcast is hosted by Business Web Integrations. Get in touch with them at businesswebintegrations, all one word, .com.au to discuss your web hosting and business needs.